All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world as you watch this. And welcome to our Ask the Experts webinar. My name is Scott Price, and I'll be your host for today's session, which is our first double feature webinar for Ask the Experts. And our intention with this is to present solutions that our team has developed for clients using Atlassian products. And our hope is that you might find some benefit from our expertise. And so just kind of give you an idea of how that's going to work. We'll start with a brief technical presentation from our experts, followed by a Q&A session. And today, since we have two topics, we'll have topic one, which will be immediately followed by Q&A for that topic. And then we'll pivot to topic two, immediately followed by Q&A for topic two. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. And we will do our best to address as many questions as we possibly can. But if you happen to ask a question that we don't have an answer to, then we'll research that and we'll get back to you at a later date. And today we're fortunate to have a panel of distinguished experts with us who are going to share their insights and answer your questions. And so the first part of our double feature, topic one, is about extracting Tempo timesheet data and Workday integration. And our experts for topic one are Jason Kidner and Raymond Amori. And I'll let them introduce themselves. Jason, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Yeah. My name is Jason Kidner. I'm an enterprise solutions architect here at Valiantis. I've been with Valiantis for over 5 years now and worked with many different clients on all sorts of different types of Atlassian solutions with various Atlassian tools. And yeah, looking forward to sharing about one particular one that we worked on last year.
Cool. Thanks, Scott. My name is Raymond. I'm a customs solution engineer. So I do a lot of software development for custom needs for different clients. I've been with Valiantis for about 4 years, I believe. So yeah, I'm excited to share some info about the projects that we worked on.
Thank you, Jason and Raymond. And Raymond, you have a radio voice. Have you ever been a radio broadcaster? I think
thanks.
I think you can do that. Yeah. Okay. So part two of our double feature, topic number two, is streamlining asset management, automating vehicle creation and approval. And our experts for this topic are Sarah Wright, John Hill, and Tony Kelly. And Sarah, do you want to kick us off with introductions?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. So like everybody else said, how long they've been with Valiantis, I'm just coming up, I think, on 2 years. But what I want folks to know about me is if you look at LinkedIn, you're going to see I am a learner and oversharer. And on LinkedIn, I do like to share little things that I find, little tweaks that you can make over on your Atlassian products just to make things a little simpler and smoother. And that's one of the things we'll be covering in our portion of the webinar. Hand it over to John.
Hello, I'm John Hill. I've been with Valiantis almost exactly 4 years now. I've been working in the software development in the Atlassian ecosystem for about the same period of time. So, and over to Tony.
Yep, I'm also a custom development engineer. I've been working with Atlassian for about 3 years now, so I'm the youngest one in the group. But yeah, worked on quite a few different clients, and I'm excited to share you what we got.
All right. Well, thank all of you for being here. We're excited to hear from each of you. And to kick things off, we'll start with topic one. So Jason and Raymond, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Make sure I can share here. All right. So, yeah, Raymond and I get to share first. And so we have a couple different titles for this. One is about integrating with Workday and Tempo timesheets extraction. This can be also summed up in a custom solution for Jira and Tempo timesheets. That's what this ultimately turned out to be. So I'm going to tee up some of the overview of what we were asked to do, and Raymond's going to really get more deep into how we actually solution this. So some of the requirements for this was we were working with an enterprise level client. They currently are on Jira Data Center and with over 10,000 users. And they wanted to start to implement Tempo timesheets, start to do time tracking within Jira and Tempo. And they had a very customized or like very specific use cases on how they wanted to do this. Most of them were not necessarily out of the box using Jira and Tempo. One of the requirements was that they wanted to track time against portfolio epics coming from Jira Align. They are also a Jira Align customer. And so they wanted that work tracked against portfolio epics. And if you don't know anything about Jira Align and Jira, the portfolio epic level, which is that layer of work above Jira epics and features, that does not sync out of the box with Jira. Okay, so that was something we had to think through. How are we going to get those over to Jira? They also wanted to log time against internal issues like time off, meetings, things of that nature, that's a pretty typical use case for most clients with Tempo. The second big requirement was they wanted their users to submit their timesheets for approval by their HR hierarchy direct report, okay, which was the source of truth for that is in Workday. And again, if you don't know anything about Tempo timesheets, just know that you can, out of the box, submit your timesheets to a team lead within Tempo. But Tempo, there's no out-of-the-box solution for bringing in users and their managers into Tempo teams. So again, another challenging thing that we had to solve for. And then lastly, let me go back. Then lastly, they wanted the Tempo work log data along with the approval status of their timesheet approvals, along with the HR hierarchy data, like who was their manager, who approved their timesheets. This client wanted all of that data extracted into a very nicely analyzed CSV for their data lake and for their business analysts and their financial departments to use for those purposes. So some big asks. None of these, again, were out-of-the-box solutions. So again, at a very high level that Ray's going to go to more in depth, these all involved custom integrations with both Tempo and timesheets and Jira. There was a script runner job that needed to be used to help to sync portfolio epics from Jira Align into Jira. There was a script that was developed to synchronize the Workday data, that hierarchy data, to Tempo teams and also to the Jira user directory. And then lastly, there's a script to help to do the extracting of those work logs and approvals and hierarchy data. So a lot of things, really interesting things that we worked on, and Ray is now going to share more about each one of these.
Cool, thank you, Jason. So we're going to start with the Jira Align to Jira integration. So Jason's already covered some of this concept, but the integration between Jira and Jira Align doesn't exist for certain levels of hierarchy. So the customer's need was that people need to be able to select epics in Tempo when they submit their time. So there needs to be some kind of category in Tempo where all the employees are selecting from so that the time logged can be categorized for finance purposes. And it's very important that people submit their time accurately because there, like you said, there's almost 10,000 users logging time every day on Tempo, and that level of data input to sort of verify and correct any errors in that data would not really be feasible. So we really needed an automated solution to really set guide rails on the user input so that it minimized the amount of effort it took to go back to the people submitting time and have them correct things. So these epics, they needed to be sourced from Jira Align. They needed to be updated from Jira Align if something changed. If the epic in Jira Align was closed, that needed to be tracked in Jira. If a new epic was created in Jira Align, that also needed to be initialized in Jira. And so all this was to prevent people from inputting inaccurate time, essentially. So all of the Tempo portfolio epics, they were sourced from Jira Align using a script runner job. So the script runner job was built entirely in Script Runner. It was scheduled on a daily basis. And so during that scheduled run, the Script Runner task would look in the portfolio epics in Jira Align via an API call. It would fetch all those epics, and then it would organize them and then match them up with tempo portfolio epics defined in Jira. And if an epic didn't exist on the Jira side, then it would create it. If an epic existed on the Jira side, but it was closed in Jira Align, it would also close the epic in Jira so that people couldn't log time against that anymore. And so that kept those epics up to date with no management from the employees in the customer. And finally, the tempo internal epics, those were defined directly in Jira, and those are for things that didn't close and didn't necessarily need a counterpart in Jira Align, such as time off or meetings. So that formed the basis of all of the different syncs between Jira Align and Jira Software. Of course, those internal epics needed a little bit of special handling so that they weren't closed by the script. So all that was implemented within Script Runner and within the Jira configuration. And once those were set up, then users could log time against them using the built-in tempo interface. So we didn't have to do any customization on tempo itself. Where possible, we tried to use as much out-of-the-box functionality as we could, both to make the implementation a little bit easier, but also to make maintenance easier, because the more customizations you make, the more things have to be kept up to date. So I believe that sums up the Jira Align to Jira integration. Next, I'll talk about the Workday integration with Jira. So Workday, if you're not familiar with, it's just an HR system. Our client was using it to keep track of all the employees, their managers, employees' information, things like that. There's not really a one single logical integration with Jira with something like Workday, because it is, after all, two totally separate products with two totally different objectives. So the client sort of walked through all the needs that they had for sourcing the data from Workday and making changes in Jira. So some of these needs included all of the employees in Workday had to be synced to Jira, and they had to exist in Jira. We made the decision early on to not auto-create users or auto-disable users in Jira based on the Workday data, because if there was a data inconsistency, that's not necessarily something that we wanted to override by default. So instead of that, what the script did is result in a log output. But I'll talk more about the log output later. But that was one of the primary objectives, was to ensure that all the Workday employees existed in Jira, because that was very important. If they don't have a Jira account, not only can they not log time, they can't see any of their ticket information. Secondly, all users that were defined in Workday and had a Jira account had to be on a tempo team. That is because the hierarchical structure was very important. Even if a person was not necessarily logging time, they had to be part of a hierarchy for the approvals process and the finance document to be generated properly. So based on the Workday data, every employee had a direct manager, and the script would go through that hierarchy and ensure that that manager had a team with all of their direct reports on it. The manager needs to approve the time for all of their the people reporting to them. And so out of the box functionality for tempo is that on a team, everybody submits their timesheets and their manager approves it. So again, out of the box functionality that we wanted to preserve, we just made sure that all of the Workday employees were on a team with their manager as the team lead. When an employee changes teams, of course, their manager has to be updated. If an employee doesn't log time, or they log their time somewhere else, then they need to not have a time logging requirement in tempo. So that was an additional little wrinkle, but they still needed to be part of the hierarchy. When employees leave, of course, then they need to be deactivated in Jira. And again, with so many Jira users, it would have been impossible to maintain this. On any given day, you could have 100 employees leave or join the company. And on any given day, if there's a reorganization or something like that, it could be a very complex movement of employees between teams. So it's very important that the script keep all that up to date. So in the end, how this was implemented was that we got a data extract file from Workday, just as a static file. Each day, an employee would go and generate this file from Workday. Then we would take that file and use a script to parse it and basically generate a full employee hierarchy for the entire company. Then we would take that employee hierarchy and using the Tempo and Jira APIs, we would do all those checks that I mentioned earlier. So we'd ensure that the user exists. We would ensure that the user has access to Tempo, ensure that the user is on the correct team. If not, move them or add them to the correct team. Ensure that if the employee is deactivated in the Workday data, then that they are deactivated in Jira. We didn't delete users, as I mentioned earlier. We don't want to do a destructive operation, but we do make sure that they're deactivated so they cannot access Jira or log time. And if a user was not required to log time in Tempo because they were logging somewhere else, or they were of a certain level that they did not need to log time, then they would be added to something called a workload scheme. So if you're not familiar with Tempo, a workload scheme is basically a schema that you would configure that assigns a required number of hours to every employee that's part of that workload scheme. And so we could leverage that out-of-the-box functionality to assign users to a 0-hour workload scheme, essentially, and that would remove their need to log time. So while they would still be part of Tempo, they'd still be part of Jira. For the data consistency, we could avoid sending them reminder emails, which was an ask from the customer. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the script, after it finished running, it would output a log of everything that it did, not only for audit purposes, so that they can make sure that the script is working correctly, which is really important during development, but also so that we can use that log file for the next step, which is the data extract step, which I'll get into next. So the data extract step is the bottom part of this graph. It is a script that runs on a GitLab pipeline. And the customer's need for this script was to basically pull out all of the work log information from Tempo for a given time range. And then they would use this data for a variety of purposes, one of which, for example, was financial reporting. So this financial report, of course, it would have to have all the hours logged against different epics defined in the company, which goes back to the Jira Align integration. But also it would need to have the employee hierarchy, which isn't part of the logs from Tempo by default. So the implementation consisted of getting the extracted work logs, but then matching them up with the log from the Workday integration. So for every employee, all that information that was coming from Workday could be linked directly in this extract step. It could be linked with the work log information. So that made it really easy for the finance team to take the extracted work log information and perform data analysis on it, because with the extract script, it would output, without any additional work, it would output all of the log time, what epic it was logged against, what managers it was logged against. You could roll up the data to different levels of management to aggregate all of the worked hours under each team and everything of that nature. The script would output a CSV, so that could be imported into any other product. And so that was very convenient for the finance team. And I think that sums up the Tempo integration. So are there any questions?
All right, thanks, gentlemen. Ariel Da Silva is my co-host. He's going to be bringing the questions. And so, Ariel, do we have any questions for topic one?
Hi, everyone. Yes, we do have 3 questions here. Let me check the first one. So this was designed for Jira and Tempo Data Center, right? Could the same solution be created in the cloud environment?
Yes. So actually, our client was foreseeing moving to cloud in the future. So the way all of these integrations were developed is they just use either script runner or they use the built-in APIs for Jira and Tempo. And any external data sources we would handle separately. So because we use the APIs in general, there's counterparts for these API endpoints on cloud, and they're usually pretty similar to the DC endpoints. We avoided directly accessing the Jira DC database, which is a tempting solution because it's very powerful, but a solution like that cannot be implemented in cloud. So the way we did it with the API allows for a pretty easy migration of the scripts to a cloud environment.
Nice.
Yeah.
How did you keep the portfolio epics in Jira updated from state changes in the Jira line side?
So we would have the state cloned into Jira. And so as the script runner script ran, it would basically check the current state in a line and it would compare it with what it sees in Jira. And then it would have a data matching algorithm to basically see what does not match anymore in the Jira environment, check to see if it needs to be updated, because as I mentioned, that we have those internal epics that we don't want to update. And then out of those, anything that actually needs to be updated, it would make those changes in Jira.
Yeah, and can I add to that? There was
Yep.
there were plenty of requirements we're not getting into, but one of them too was they wanted to be able to handle if a portfolio epic in Jira line was canceled, because that's you're able to do that in Jira line. So that was a special like nuance of our script to go out and find even the canceled portfolio epics, and then there was a corresponding canceled status in Jira. So that was a special use case. And then lastly, they wanted to allow the portfolio epics to be in the accepted or closed state for like, I think up to a month before they would shut off the time tracking. So we actually had to work out 2 different statuses in Jira, one for it's been accepted and you can still track time. And then eventually the script would kind of determine has it been in that state for up to 30 days. And afterwards it would be transitioned, those individual epics would be transitioned to this final state, if you will, of I think it was called like accepted without time tracking, something like that. So that would be a total shutdown. So they wanted to give that buffer of a month for people to still put their time in.
Yep.
Okay, great. How did the Workday to Tempo Teams integration handle when a person was offboarded and onboarded?
Great. So essentially, when a user is onboarded, they would exist in the Workday data, excuse me, but they would not exist in Jira. So I mentioned earlier that we don't want to auto create the users. So what the script would do is it would initially run, it would do all its updating, but it would see that there was a user in Workday or multiple users potentially that didn't exist in Jira. So then it would output the log. And there would be different logs. One would just be sort of like an audit log with all the changes that were made. But the other one was a warning log. And that warning log would consist of things like users that don't exist in Jira. So then that step would be a manual step of taking that log and going and creating those users. But on any given day, there would not be that many users to go through that step. So that was a maintenance task that they were happy to do. Mainly because we don't want to auto create users that by mistake, essentially. And if a user was offboarded, that would also be in the Workday data. They would be in there, but they would say they were inactive. And so the script would see that, and then it would also deactivate the user. But there is a clean way to just deactivate a user without deleting them, so that if there was a mistake, their data would still be there. And of course, we never want to delete Tempo users because they'll have log time. So by deleting those users, that messes up the log time, and the log time is of course still valid if an employee were to be offboarded. Especially they might have like incomplete timesheets. So it allows for all of that.
And then Ray, that the script would like remove them from the team they had been on, or
Correct.
if they were a team lead, somehow those new people would would roll up to another team lead.
Yep.
So many different permutations of of things. Yeah.
I think what it did actually was that, yes, if a manager left the company, all those people would be orphaned, and so they would show up as warnings as well. So if in the Workday data, those users, or those employees rather, were assigned to a new manager, the script would pick that up and it would move them as it would any other employee. But if those employees were still assigned to the manager that had left, they would get orphaned in Tempo and they wouldn't be able to log time. So then it outputs that as a warning instead of auto assigning them to the next manager up, just so that somebody knows that they need to go fix the configuration in Workday.
Great, thanks for the answers. These were all the questions we had here. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Jason and Raymond. Thank you very much for that information. And we will move now to topic 2, which is streamlining asset management, automating vehicle creation and approval. And Sarah, Tony, and John, take it away.
So hey there. Yeah, I'm as Jason and Ray were talking, right? They were taking something very big and complex and throwing in some automations and some data integrity checks amongst so many other things, but with similar goals to what we were doing with our our vehicle asset updates and being able to create these assets, right? Our goals were, hey, let's take a bunch of manual effort, take a bunch of things that could create duplicates, et cetera, and figure out better ways to manage that all while using the Atlassian tools. So if you recall, or if you heard my little intro, right, I like those little things. I like those small things that are easy tweaks inside of systems that can have a large impact on your day-to-day activities. And I think what we're going to talk about here with vehicles as assets and fleet management is just one of those cases. So, right, how can we make those fleet updates be easier? And our original title, Streamlining Asset Management, Automating Vehicle Creation and Approval, which might have been easier for Scott to say. But then, of course, it's just those small changes, large impact. We were working with a client who had a large fleet of vehicles. We have to do one of those, can't really say their name kind of things here, but they had a lot of vehicles that they were maintaining. And they really needed a better way to understand what vehicles were currently in the fleet. And then there were a lot of additions to those fleets that were coming in, and wanted to create a way to do that better. So they developed a system, right? They were using Jira Service Management to try to collect some of that data. But then what happened is they were manually copying a lot of that data from the forms where they were collecting information, and then pasting it over into the assets. And those forms also sometimes didn't have all of the information that was required in order to be able to create that vehicle. So they had cases of missing data. When that data was missing, of course, that could cause delays in those assets being updated properly. Somebody would have to go out and chase down that additional information sometimes. Then there's that copying and pasting, which I put an extra sad emoji on, because sometimes I think it's 2024. How much copying and pasting do we really still have to do? And yet we do. And then they also had a challenge of duplicated vehicles, because if somebody, isn't in there checking properly to make sure that this is an entirely new vehicle, then we got a whole data hygiene issue with those duplicated vehicles. So we came in with the KISS solution, right? The keep it simple, silly solution. And it uses a lot of out of the box. We didn't have to do all of the different kind of integrations with all the external systems like Workday, like our counterparts had to do. we were able to leverage those features that are included with Jira Service Management to create a form that collects the information and then use that requirement feature to ensure the right data was getting added, or all of the data that we needed. We could check for, fields that had the data, but we also would be including a step to make sure somebody was taking a peek at that and making sure the data was accurate. So we created custom fields inside of Jira to store that data, then add in an approval step on our workflow so that somebody could physically make sure the information was accurate that was being entered, and that we knew who those approvers were by adding that into our requests. Created an automation that would check to see if the VIN number was new or unique. And so because we didn't want to have those duplicated vehicles over in our assets, that's the way we made sure that didn't happen. So then automating the creation of that new vehicle asset. And then what happens if somebody did enter in a VIN that had been previously used, then we would have a mechanism in place also to let them know and to suggest either resubmitting or, possibly reaching out and updating what that proper VIN should be. So to keep our vehicle analogy going, let's look under the hood and see what that looked like to set this up. First, I'm going to show you an object schema. So if you're not using objects, not using assets that are available to you when you have a JSM Premium or Enterprise Edition, it's just basically a relational database that starts with something called a schema. And we have a very simple one out here for our vehicles. Our schemas are going to exist and have object types, which in this case, our object is a vehicle, and then they have attributes. So this is all of that sort of metadata that we want to collect about these vehicles. So we're going to be collecting the make, model, the year, the color, fuel type, and then whether or not that vehicle is out for being borrowed currently or not. We can talk more about that later. Coming back into our objects view, what we see here is just a list of all of those different VINs that are created. And I apologize in advance for anybody who out there is like, those aren't long enough to be VIN numbers. And you're going to see some make and models that don't exactly match up. So I apologize if that feels like fingers on a chalkboard for you, but this is just to give you examples of how we are able to store that data out in assets. And then we're going to move over and show you how we can use JSM to update it. So our first step was we created that form in Jira Service Management to collect it. I'm going to show you what that looks like first from the customer or the submitter's perspective. So they're going to come out to a help center and a portal, and they would select the action they want to take. So in this case, I want to add a vehicle. And from here, they're presented with a series of fields. So just saying, add this vehicle or whatever that is. Now, right now we have this set up so that it automatically shows some knowledge base articles. Maybe there's additional information folks need to know about submitting a vehicle request, and that would give them an option here to be able to click on one of these and read more information and then come back and continue filling out their form if they wanted to. So moving past there, we created these fields where we're storing data for them to select from. So maybe they have an Audi that they want to add and it's an A4. We're going to go with a hybrid. Again, sorry if these don't actually exist in the real world. So speaking of that, we'll make this a rainbow colored one. And we'll put in our VIN number as just a random set of 9 numbers here. And then I hit send. So it creates that request. It's going to create that request over in our JSM project. And then that's going to kick off our next process. I'm going to come over here into Jira Service Management from the agent's view or the Jira Service Management user's view. And I'm looking currently at a queue that is set up that contains all of those submissions from our submitters. And here we're able to add in columns for request type key, what those summaries are. Here we can get a quick peek at what that VIN number is. And then here we're able to see if a vehicle has indeed been created in our database or not, because we're going to pull that information in from our asset object. And let me scroll over here so we can also see the reporters, what the status of this is, and then who those approvers are. And so in this case, what we wanted to do was when a request came into us, we didn't just want to automatically right then and there create that vehicle. We did have it go through one approval step. And so once these are created, the first thing that happens is it says, hey, I need somebody to take a look at this and approve it for me. So let's take a look at the one that Scott entered. And Scott wants to add a compact fuel efficient sedan with modern features and sleek design, which sounds like kind of a wish list he's going to take to a dealership. And so and he wants it to be in a Ferrari that is blue and a gas powered engine. So we say, yep, Scott, everything looks good because I, as the approver, have come through here and checked to make sure that that data in there is what I expect it to be. And I can hit approve. And then what happens behind the scenes, we have an automation that is running and it's doing a few things. The automation is going to look at this VIN number to see if it exists yet or not. If it does exist, it's going to create a vehicle. If it doesn't exist, if it does exist, it's going to let us know, and it would have canceled this request. If it does not yet exist, it's going to go over and create that asset. Let me give this screen a little bit of a refresh here, because what you may or may not have noticed, I'm using a little sleight of hand on you guys. So down here in this vehicle area, we didn't see that before I refreshed my screen, but we see it now because our automation worked. It created a new vehicle out in our assets. So let me come back over into our schema and we're going to look for this new one, JT. The rest of them were all just numbers. So this one should be fairly obvious to us when I refresh out here that indeed it was created. And right here, I can see JT3H was created for us. I'm going to go back and do a different one now and I'm going to change this one to a VIN that I know actually exists. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to update that again as the approver. I can make these changes right as the agent in here. I'm going to go ahead and approve that request and then do our magic refresh again. And then what's going to happen is we get a note down here. It says this VIN already exists. Please check the VIN and resubmit if needed. And if I scroll up to the top, then I'm going to see that that is indeed canceled. So we'll take a peek at how that automation works to do those things. I'm in our project's automation rules and clicking here, and we'll walk through this one. We trigger this one off of when an issue is transitioned to waiting for support, which is the same status it would go to once we hit approved. If we were to decline it, nothing would happen because we wouldn't be transitioning it here. And then we're making sure that we're only going to take this action when it comes in as a add a vehicle request type, because we might have 100 different other request types out there and we don't need this automation to run on those. So we want to narrow that down. Then some of this magic happens where we're going to go look up objects. And this is where it's so useful to be able to use automation and to tie in what happens on a request and then be able to use that information to go find things over in our asset databases. So we're going to look up an object, and the magic of this is right here in our query. So first it's going to say, I'm going to go out and I want to look to where we're holding our assets, our vehicles, which is right here, that vehicle type. And then it says, hey, let's go look at the VIN out there and look for any that matches what they submitted here in our custom field, which is that VIN field. And this next step says, well, if I found something, if I didn't find it, equals 0, right? It doesn't exist. It's 0. It's nothing. We can have a debate about, or an interesting conversation about, what does nothing mean? But in this case, equals 0 means it couldn't find it. So then it takes the step to actually create the vehicle. So I'm creating that object over in the assets area. And so first I need to tell it where it's going to happen is in the schema demo. The object type is the vehicle. And then each one of these are all of the fields that we submitted from our form. And so the make field, the model field, it's going to take all of that data and plop that over into our new vehicle. And then refetching data basically means we're going to take a little pause here because some stuff has been happening and we made changes. So now let's go back out and get that data from that issue. And now I want to edit the issue. So before I was working up here, I was making changes to objects, but within the same branch of changes, I can say, I'm going to go back into that issue. And now I'm going to update that and say that our VIN now equals that custom field so that we can show that out there on our issue. Coming down though, if we have a if then we need an else. And so our else says, hey, if it doesn't equal 0, right? If it exists, then instead what we're going to do is add that comment that I showed you, and we're going to go ahead and mark that as canceled. So a lot of actions nobody has to take because this action right here is the one that is replacing the dreaded copy and paste from all of the places. This one is the one that is making sure that that vehicle doesn't already exist out there. Nobody has to go out and check the data and double, and ensure that it's happening. Nobody has to go run filters out on the data to say, oh, hey, I happen to notice these have the same VINs, etc. A lot of that magic just lives straight here in that automation. So now that we have that in place, though, I'm going to take you just a couple steps back, though, and show you how that actual request type was created. So we're back in our project. We're using request types. We've created an add a vehicle, and here we pulled in all of those custom fields that we show on our form. But one of our key points, though, was we wanted to be able to have an approver there, and we didn't want anybody worried about who the approver should be. We already knew exactly who needed to approve all of these requests. So here again, we can use one of our out-of-the-box features of Jira Service Management. And when we create one of these request types, we have an option to hide a field from a form. And in this case, it is the approvers field. We already know in our demo instance here that I'm the one who needs to approve each one of those issues. So I come in here, I say use a preset value, I add the name, and it could be names of people who need to be able to hit that approve button on those issues. So we don't have to show them to the customers. They don't have to know who it is. We automatically populate that. And so that when any of those issues come in, then we would go here and we would see who that approver is. And then I, as the approver, can very quickly come out here. And because of the way we have our queue fields set up here, I could make some very quick decisions about what needed approvals. Let me actually make that screen a little bit bigger for us. So I've only got that top one, but if I had more of those that were waiting for approval, even straight here from the queue, I could select that, I could transition it, and I could move that on to the next, or actually the better idea here, because I clicked the wrong one, is I can hit approve straight from here, confirm that, and then again, all of those automations and actions are going to be happening behind there. And I never even had to open up the issue in order to do that if I keep all of the relevant information here in the queue, which again is just one of those little things, right? Little changes that you can make here and there to make some of these processes easier, keep your data hygiene that much better. So with that, we've covered all of those topics, and I want to throw it out and find out if we have any questions.
Thanks for presenting
Thank you,
this.
Sarah.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Scott, please.
Oh, no, I was just fixing to hand it over to you for questions.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Sarah, for presenting this. This looks great. We do have a list of questions here from our chat. So can this be automated, this workflow be automated to adapt to other asset types and industries?
I was just gonna give Tony and John a chance. Tony, you go for it,
Yeah,
friend.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
for sure.
definitely.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tony. Sorry.
I was going to say it definitely can. I've actually done this with another client where we had to do it with the users. Actually, the users, if you ever look at a user profile in Jira, it's very limited information. And so we had to do this where whenever the client onboarded another employee, they wanted to add additional information. And so we did an automation process like this for another client for users.
And so in that case, I'm guessing where we have vehicle as our assets there you actually had user accounts and information about the people that you would populate. Nice.
Right.
Oh, that's great. I was just thinking about a customer that I have that I might need this to make it better.
That's what we love doing, making it better.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of automation there, which might be overwhelming by the administrators if they never done this, like something like this kind of stuff. How did you ensure this new process was user friendly for both the users and the administrators?
Well, I think we took them through the process initially when we set up the automation. So we took the admins through the process and got them familiar with putting the what we were doing in the automation, and then they were already familiar. This was part of a larger system we had, which was a vehicle, a vehicle fleet management system that we had built for them. And so this was a request that came in to be able to add vehicles through their portal, and so this worked out for them. So showing the admins how the migration or the automation was going to work, and then going through the process with them was one way that we made it, user friendly. It's once you get into it, it's not real difficult, and there is a lot of documentation out there on the automation. So.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. And, in terms of, yes, a lot of automations that are out there. So I'm sharing my screen again with automation rules, and just wanted to share with folks that you see a label here where I've labeled this fleet. And if I clear that selection, what can happen is you can get really long lists of automations that exist out here. So want to call attention that, using labels to make sure it's easier to find your automation rules. And then I also want to point out the little info icons next to our automation names. Whenever you're creating a new automation or anything, if there is a description field available to you, I'm going to highly recommend you use that. I kind of joke around about how often I thank my past self for filling that in. And then ideally, maybe somebody in the future who stumbles across these things, right? And they don't necessarily know who built this originally, or the person, may have changed roles. When you leave those little breadcrumbs for people to understand how to, how those things work or what they are meant to do, then that can go a long way to making sure that the things continue to work properly in the future.
Okay, now a question more on the user side of things. They were doing this process manually. You guys moved them to an automated process. How did you handle this transition with the end users?
Well, they came to us initially and asked if we could do this. As I was mentioning, this was part of a larger fleet management system that we put together in Jira for them. And so we were doing just a list, and they were like, we would like to automate this, because they're getting requests from people that weren't part of the automation or part of the fleet management system. So they were getting those requests, and they were having to enter those in. So they initiated the request to start off, and they were involved through the whole process of testing and what they wanted in it. So that's how we kind of involve them.
Can I just emphasize getting them involved with testing, right? That's a key change management piece, no matter what it is. And I see Jason and Ray shaking their hand, or not shaking, nodding their heads as well, right? When you get people involved in the process and building the process and testing the process, that whole change management piece absolutely becomes easier.
Turn them into evangelists.
We did a lot of testing with our customer for the tempo thing. A lot of back and forth.
Nice. Okay, so one of the things that we saw is that you are using just out of the box features for this, which is great. What would you say are the key benefits of doing something like that, like not using anything outside of the Atlassian environment?
I would say maintenance, being able to have the customer be able to maintain this once, we hand it off to them. This is also, you can do this in a coded solution, but then the client would have to have a, whole development team to maintain this. So maintenance is a big one.
Yeah, and but also hearing Ray, one of the things that stuck out with me on your presentation, right, is being future thinking, right? So always anything that we can do within there is going to make it more sustainable. But when you think about what those future use cases might be and sort of coding and planning for that, that's an amazing thing to do.
Great. Do you guys know, like, how big was the impact of the people that were at the end of the line creating those vehicles through these automations? Like, how big of a change on their daily life was this?
Well, I know we saved them a lot of time with a lot of copying and pasting, so they were really happy about that.
Yeah, as far as a total number, I'm not exactly sure of the exact count, but they were very pleased with this, like Tony was saying. And yeah.
Okay, last one is, what kind of advice would you give someone looking to implement a similar automation to their organization?
It would probably be to have your business logic laid out pretty well. You don't want to, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, be guessing about what you want. You definitely want to have it laid out when you start your automation process too. So that way you don't have to go back, change things, fix this and fix that. So.
And also, yeah, because the first words that popped into my head were plan, plan, plan. But and then I might sound like I'm going to say the opposite. But also, as you're working throughout the day with any processes, you can be cognizant of areas where it's like, I did this again, I did this again, I did this again, right? And honestly, when it starts to feel tedious to you, that's a good indicator that, hey, maybe it's time to explore something. And there can even be just those, a small change. Maybe it's even just, I keep doing this particular thing, I'm going to try to automate that. And then look at the next step of the process or look at some other part of the process and find the areas you can automate.
Yeah. I think once one's completed, they'll look for other opportunities because it, like you said, it just streamlines the work and makes things like validation not really an issue. So these automations are a real powerful tool.
Okay, thanks everyone. These were all the questions we have. Yep.
Okay, well then let me kind of wrap it up here. And it's been a great hour where we've used almost all the time. So I want to thank our experts for sharing their knowledge and insights. And it was fun to have this double feature, and look forward to doing this again. And a big thank you to all of you for attending today and participating with your questions. And I think we got to all the questions, but if there's a last minute question that pops in, we will follow up with you after the webinar. And before we sign off, I'd like to just remind you about upcoming events. And this, what's on your screen right now, you see a list of upcoming events, including our next Ask the Experts webinar, which is on October 31st. And Ariel, what's the topic for that next one? I believe you're doing that one, aren't you?
Yeah, we'll be doing a presentation on the usage of Atlassian API to make your life easier on the day-to-day, like how to build small scripts, how to authenticate using the API, that kind of stuff.
All right, great. Looking forward to that one. All right, well, thanks once again and have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.